On a cold suburban night, Theodore Bennett stood in the doorway of his own house and told Meghan Diaz to leave. The porch light was bright enough for the neighbors to see everything. She had just given birth days earlier. The newborn was still wrapped in a hospital blanket. He did not lower his voice. He did not hesitate. Behind him, his mother watched in silence, and another woman did not look away. Meghan said nothing. She stepped forward into the dark with the child in her arms, while inside that house ownership had already begun to change in ways no one there could yet understand. If you believe silence is never weakness, stay with this story until the end. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. And if stories about truth consequences and quiet strength matter to you, consider subscribing. There had never been a single moment anyone could point to and say that was when the marriage began to fracture. It was quieter than that. It unfolded in glances that lingered too long, in sentences left unfinished, in decisions made without consultation, and then explained as necessity. From the outside, Meghan Diaz and Theodore Bennett looked stable. Their home sat on a clean, tree-lined street in a well-regarded suburb outside Chicago, the kind of neighborhood where the mail arrived on time and the neighbors nodded politely without asking questions. Inside that home, things were arranged with a different logic. Theodore believed in structure and hierarchy, in the idea that every person had a defined role. He had built his career in commercial real estate financing, where numbers aligned cleanly, and outcomes could be predicted with enough pressure applied in the right direction. He carried that same thinking into his marriage. He handled the accounts, the mortgage, the insurance policies, the investments. He spoke about these things in calm, authoritative tones, as though managing the household were simply another extension of his professional competence. Meghan let him. That had always been the part others misunderstood. She did not argue when Theodore insisted on consolidating their finances under accounts he controlled. She did not object when he questioned her spending, even when those questions were unnecessary. She did not respond when his mother Eleanor Bennett suggested during Sunday dinners that Meghan had never really learned how to contribute in a meaningful way. She did not defend herself when Clara Bennett, Theodore's younger sister, laughed too loudly at remarks that were not quite jokes. Silence in that house was often mistaken for agreement. But Meghan's silence had never been empty. Before the marriage, before the suburban house, and the carefully managed image, she had lived a life that did not lend itself easily to explanation. Her father, Alejandro Diaz, had never been a public man. There were no magazine profiles, no interviews, no photographs in business journals. What existed instead were layers. Companies held through other companies. Real estate owned through entities that revealed nothing at first glance. Investments that moved quietly, deliberately, and with long-term intent. To most people, Alejandro Diaz had appeared distant, even absent. To Meghan, he had been precise. He did not explain everything to her when she was younger. He did not burden her with the full scope of what he controlled. But he taught her how to observe. He taught her how to read contracts, how to recognize patterns in behavior, how to understand that what people said in public rarely matched what they protected in private. He taught her that restraint was not weakness, it was timing. Those lessons remained even after she stepped into a life that seemed smaller. When Meghan married Theodore, she did not bring visible wealth into the relationship. There were no large transfers, no sudden upgrades, no displays that might invite questions. Her father had insisted on separation, on patience, on the idea that certain structures would remain untouched until the right moment. Theodore interpreted that absence in his own way. He saw a woman who came from modest means, who had no independent financial standing, who relied on him for stability. It aligned neatly with his understanding of the world. It made sense of her quietness. It justified his decisions. Eleanor Bennett encouraged that interpretation. "She's comfortable letting you handle things," Eleanor had said once, her voice smooth with approval as she watched Theodore review documents at the dining table. "Some women know their place. It makes life easier." Clara had laughed at that, not unkindly, but without hesitation. Meghan had been in the room when it was said. She had been setting down plates, her movements unhurried, her expression unchanged. No one asked what she thought. No one expected her to respond. That too was part of the arrangement. Over time, the assumptions hardened into certainty. Theodore stopped explaining his decisions. He informed, he corrected. He occasionally reminded Meghan of the cost of things, of how much the house required, of how important it was to maintain discipline. There were small comments about her not working in a way that contributed meaningfully, about how fortunate she was not to have to worry about financial pressures. He did not notice the way she listened. He did not notice that she kept track of everything anyway. The months leading up to the birth of their child brought a different kind of strain, one that Theodore addressed with the same methods he applied to everything else. He scheduled appointments. He arranged insurance coverage. He made decisions about the hospital, the doctor, the timing. He spoke with confidence about preparation, about readiness. Meghan attended each appointment. She answered each question. She followed every instruction. But the emotional distance between them did not close. If anything, it widened in ways that were subtle enough to ignore, but consistent enough to matter. Theodore spent more evenings away from home, citing work obligations that extended later than usual. When he was present, he seemed distracted, checking his phone, responding to messages that did not wait. Conversations became shorter. His tone shifted from directive to dismissive when Meghan asked anything that required more than a brief answer. Eleanor's visits increased during that time. She brought advice often uninvited about motherhood, about responsibility, about how Meghan should be preparing herself, not just physically but mentally, to step into a role that demanded more than passivity. The word lingered in the air after she said it, as though it explained something fundamental. Clara followed those visits with lighter remarks that carried the same weight beneath their surface. "You're lucky Theo handles everything," she had said one afternoon, leaning against the kitchen counter while Meghan folded baby clothes. "Some people don't have that kind of support," Meghan had nodded. She did not point out that support and control were not always the same thing. By the time the child was born, the structure of the marriage was firmly in place. Theodore stood at the center of it, confident in his role, certain of his authority. Meghan moved within it, quietly fulfilling expectations, offering no resistance that might disrupt the balance. What no one in that house understood was that the balance itself was temporary. In the days following the birth, while Meghan was still recovering, while the newborn slept in short, fragile intervals, the first signs of change began to appear. They did not arrive loudly. They came in the form of missed calls, of messages left without response, of emails, marked urgent, that remained unopened longer than intended. The name attached to many of those attempts was one Theodore did not recognize: Daniel Reeves. He saw it once, briefly, when Meghan's phone lit up on the nightstand. He glanced at the screen, registered that it was another unknown contact, and dismissed it without curiosity. People called for all kinds of reasons. It did not concern him. It would eventually. But at that moment, in that house, under that roof, Theodore Bennett believed he understood everything that mattered. He believed the structure he had built would hold. He believed Meghan Diaz existed within the limits he had defined. And Meghan, still quiet, still observant, allowed that belief to remain untouched for a little while longer. The first call came while the hospital room was still filled with the soft mechanical rhythm of monitored breathing and distant footsteps in the hallway. Meghan lay half awake, her body still adjusting to the quiet aftermath of labor, the newborn resting beside her in a clear bassinet. The world had narrowed into small, manageable pieces. A blanket, a steady pulse, the weight of something new and fragile that required all her attention. Her phone, placed face down on the side table, began to vibrate. It was not an unusual occurrence. Over the past 2 days, there had been messages from acquaintances, brief congratulations from people she had not spoken to in months, a few polite check-ins. Meghan had not responded to most of them. She conserved her energy carefully. Even small actions required more thought than they once had. The phone continued to vibrate. After a moment, she reached for it, her movements slow but deliberate. The screen lit up, illuminating a name she did not immediately recognize. Daniel Reeves. The call ended before she could answer. A second later, a voicemail notification appeared. Meghan looked at the name again. Something about it felt familiar, not in a recent way, but in the quiet, distant sense of something learned long ago and then set aside. She did not open the message immediately. The newborn stirred slightly, drawing her attention back. Meghan adjusted the blanket, her focus returning to the small, immediate world that required her presence. The phone remained in her hand for a few seconds longer before she placed it back on the table. It vibrated again less than 10 minutes later. This time, the call persisted long enough for her to answer. "Hello?" Her voice was steady, though softer than usual. There was a brief pause on the other end, followed by a controlled professional tone. "Miss Diaz, this is Daniel Reeves. I've been trying to reach you. I understand the timing may not be ideal, but it's important that we speak as soon as possible." Meghan did not respond immediately. She shifted slightly in the bed, adjusting her position so she could sit more upright. The room remained quiet around her, the late afternoon light filtering through partially drawn blinds. "I'm at the hospital," she said after a moment. "I just gave birth. I'm aware," Daniel replied, his voice careful. "And congratulations. I won't take more of your time than necessary right now. But there are matters regarding your father that require your attention." The words settled into the space between them. Father. Alejandro Diaz had not been a presence in her daily life for years. Their communication had always been structured, intentional, and often handled through intermediaries. When he did speak to her directly, it was brief, precise, and rarely emotional. He had not been absent. He had simply been elsewhere. "What about him?" Meghan asked. There was another pause, longer this time. "I would prefer to discuss the details in person," Daniel said. "But I can tell you this. There have been significant developments, and there are documents that require your review and potentially your signature." Meghan's gaze moved to the bassinet. The newborn remained asleep, unaware of the shift beginning to form just beyond the edge of that small, contained world. "I'm not in a position to meet right now," she said. "I'll be discharged in a few days." "I understand," Daniel replied. "We can arrange something at your convenience. In the meantime, I will send over preliminary documents for your awareness. Please review them when you are able." "All right." The call ended without further explanation. Meghan set the phone down again, her expression unchanged. She did not immediately open the voicemail. She did not search for the documents he mentioned. Instead, she remained where she was, her attention returning to the steady, predictable needs of the present moment. That decision, small as it seemed, would later be misunderstood. From the doorway, Theodore had observed part of the exchange. He had arrived just in time to hear Meghan say the word father. And though he had not intended to listen, the context drew his attention in a way that curiosity alone might not have. He leaned briefly against the frame, his posture relaxed, his expression neutral. "Everything okay?" he asked once the call ended. Meghan turned her head slightly. "It's about my father," she said. "A lawyer called. He said there are documents." Theodore stepped further into the room, his gaze moving briefly to the phone before returning to her. What kind of documents, he didn't specify. "He wants to meet." Theodore considered that for a moment, then shrugged lightly. "It can wait," he said. "You just had a baby. Whatever it is, it's not urgent enough to deal with right now." Meghan did not argue. "That's what I told him." Theodore nodded, satisfied with the answer. He moved closer to the bassinet, glancing down at the newborn with a brief, distracted smile before checking his own phone. "People call at inconvenient times," he added. "You don't need to pick up everything." Meghan said nothing. The phone remained on the table as the afternoon turned into evening. Notifications continued to appear. Emails marked urgent. Follow-up messages from Daniel Reeves. A second number attempting to reach her. A subject line referencing estate documentation. Theodore noticed them once in passing. He did not read them. Over the next 2 days, the pattern repeated. Calls came in at measured intervals, never frantic, never careless. Each one was placed with intention. Each message left was concise, professional, and increasingly clear in its urgency, without ever becoming alarmist. It was the kind of persistence that suggested not panic, but importance. Meghan listened to one of the voicemails late at night after Theodore had gone home to take care of a few things. And the hospital room had fallen into near silence. Miss Diaz, Daniel's voice said, steady as before. "We have confirmed that all primary documentation is now in place. There are time-sensitive elements related to asset protection and transfer protocols. It is essential that we establish direct communication as soon as you are able. Please contact me at your earliest convenience." Meghan replayed the message once. Then she opened the first of the emails. The content was dense. Legal language. References to entities she recognized only faintly, names that connected back to conversations she had once had with her father years ago. There were attachments each labeled with precise identifiers. Trust agreements, board resolutions, notices of transition. She did not read everything, not yet. Instead, she closed the email and set the phone aside. Her decision was not based on disinterest. It was based on timing. Theodore returned the next morning carrying coffee and speaking about routine matters. Discharge timing, pediatric appointments, logistics. He moved through the room with the same controlled efficiency he brought to everything else, confident in his ability to manage the situation. "Did that lawyer call again?" he asked casually at one point. "Yes, and he wants to meet." Theodore exhaled lightly as though the matter were an inconvenience. "Schedule it for next week," he said. "After we're home and settled. There's no reason to rush into anything." Meghan nodded. She did not mention the emails. She did not mention the attachments. She did not mention the phrase primary beneficiary that appeared more than once in the documents she had briefly scanned. From Theodore's perspective, the situation remained unchanged. A lawyer had reached out regarding a distant father who had never played a visible role in their lives. There were documents to review at some point in the future. Nothing that required immediate disruption. He returned to his phone. He answered messages. He stepped out of the room to take a call that lasted longer than expected. Meghan remained where she was, her gaze moving occasionally to the newborn, occasionally to the phone resting beside her. The calls continued. The emails accumulated. And within those unopened attachments, within the language Theodore had dismissed as procedural and unimportant, the foundation of everything he believed about his position in the world had already begun to shift. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but with the kind of precision that did not require noise to be effective. Meghan understood that even before she fully opened the files. She did not rush, she did not react. She waited, and in that waiting, the distance between what Theodore believed and what was actually unfolding grew wider with each passing hour. The house was unusually full that evening, not with warmth, but with presence. Voices carried from the living room into the hallway, layered in a way that made it difficult to distinguish where one conversation ended and another began. Glass touched wood in soft, controlled sounds. Someone laughed briefly and without hesitation. The kind of gathering that did not announce itself as an event, yet arranged itself carefully enough to be observed. Meghan noticed the shift the moment she stepped inside. She had been discharged earlier that afternoon. The drive home had been quiet. The newborn slept through most of it wrapped securely in the same pale blanket the hospital had provided. Theodore had driven with one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely near the center console. His attention divided between the road and intermittent messages on his phone. He had not mentioned that anyone would be there. The front door opened into light. Theodore Bennett stood near the entryway. Her posture composed, her expression neutral in a way that required effort. She looked at Meghan briefly, her gaze moving from the baby to Meghan's face, assessing rather than welcoming. "You're back," Eleanor said. It was not a question. Meghan adjusted her hold on the newborn, stepping fully into the house. The air carried the faint scent of perfume that was not hers. From the living room, Clara's voice rose above the others, quick and animated. Finally, Clara called out, appearing at the edge of the hallway. "We were starting to think you'd stay there all week." There was a smile on her face. It did not reach her eyes. Meghan did not respond immediately. She moved past them, her step steady, despite the lingering physical strain. The newborn stirred slightly, then settled again. From the living room, another figure shifted into view. Vanessa Cole. She stood near the window, her posture relaxed, one hand loosely wrapped around a glass. She did not look surprised to see Meghan. If anything, there was a brief moment of recognition, as though she had anticipated this exact timing. Theodore closed the door behind them. "You could have told me," Meghan said quietly, not turning around. "That people would be here," Theodore replied. His tone was even. "It's just family. And a few friends. Nothing you can't handle." The word handle settled into the space between them. Meghan turned, then her gaze moving across the room. Faces she recognized, some she did not. No one stepped forward. No one asked if she needed anything. The newborn, still only days old, remained cradled in her arms, present, and yet somehow peripheral to the arrangement unfolding around them. Eleanor spoke first. "You should sit," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the couch. "You look tired." There was no warmth in the suggestion, only observation. Meghan did not move toward the couch. "I'll go upstairs," she said instead. "The baby needs to rest." Theodore's response came before she could take a step. "We need to talk." The room shifted slightly, the background noise lowering just enough for the words to carry. Meghan paused. "Now?" she asked. "Yes, now." There was a precision in his tone that did not invite delay. She adjusted her hold on the baby again, her movements careful, then turned to face him fully. "All right." Theodore did not move toward the privacy of another room. He remained where he was in the center of the space, as though the presence of others were not a factor he needed to consider. Eleanor remained standing nearby. Clara leaned casually against the edge of a chair. Vanessa did not leave her position by the window. No one suggested giving them space. Theodore began without preamble. "This isn't working," he said. Meghan's expression did not change. "What isn't?" He exhaled as though the question required more explanation than it should. "This," he said, gesturing lightly between them. "The way things have been, the expectations, the imbalance." The word was chosen carefully. Meghan listened. "You've been here for years," he continued, "and nothing has changed. I've carried everything, financially, structurally, every decision that matters." He spoke as though reciting a conclusion he had already reached long before that moment. "And now we have a child," he added, "which means more responsibility, more pressure. I can't keep compensating for what isn't there." There was a brief silence after he finished. Meghan shifted her weight slightly, the newborn still secure against her chest. "What are you saying?" she asked. Theodore held her gaze. I'm saying this arrangement needs to end. The room remained still. Clara's posture straightened slightly, her attention sharpening. Eleanor's expression did not change. Vanessa lowered her glass by a fraction, watching. Meghan did not raise her voice. You want me to leave? It was not phrased as a question. Yes. Theodore's answer came without hesitation. Tonight. The word landed cleanly. There were no immediate reactions from the others, no interruptions. The absence of objection carried its own weight. Meghan looked at him for a moment longer, as though confirming that there was nothing beneath the statement that required interpretation. And the baby, she asked. Theodore's expression tightened, but only slightly. The baby goes with you. The decision was delivered with the same tone he might have used to finalize a contract. Eleanor spoke then, her voice measured. It's better this way, she said. For everyone. Clara nodded once as though in agreement. Vanessa did not speak. Meghan's gaze moved briefly across the room, taking in each face in turn. She did not linger on any of them. She did not ask for support. She did not challenge the arrangement. Instead, she adjusted the blanket around the newborn, ensuring it was secure. All right, she said. The simplicity of the response created a brief, almost imperceptible shift in the room. Theodore seemed to expect resistance, an argument, something that would justify the finality of his decision. It did not come. You understand what I'm saying, he added as though clarifying. Yes. Her voice remained steady. I'll gather what I need. She turned, then moving toward the staircase. Theodore stepped forward, blocking her path, just enough to require her to stop. You won't be taking anything from this house, he said, not without going through me first. Meghan looked at him. I'm taking the baby's things. That's fine, he replied. Essentials, nothing else. There was a pause. And Meghan, he added, lowering his voice slightly, though not enough to remove it from the awareness of the room. Let's be clear. You don't have access to the accounts. You don't have independent funds. Whatever you do next, you'll need to figure it out on your own. The statement was not delivered with anger. It was delivered with certainty. Meghan held his gaze for a moment longer. Understood. She moved past him, then continuing up the stairs without further interruption. No one followed. The room resumed its quiet, controlled rhythm, as though the moment had already concluded. Minutes later, Meghan returned. She carried a small bag, nothing excessive. The newborn remained in her arms, wrapped carefully, undisturbed by the shift in environment. She did not look back toward the living room as she moved toward the door. Theodore stood near the entryway again. His posture composed, his expression settled. This is for the best, he said. Meghan did not respond. She opened the door. The night air met her immediately, cooler than the controlled temperature inside. The porch light cast a clear, unforgiving brightness across the steps, illuminating everything without softness. From across the street, a neighbor stood partially visible, their attention drawn, despite their attempt to remain discreet. Meghan stepped forward. Behind her, the door closed. Inside, Theodore remained where he was, surrounded by the structure he believed he controlled. Outside, Meghan Diaz adjusted her hold on the newborn and walked into the night carrying nothing that could be taken from her, and leaving behind everything that had never truly belonged to him. The night did not feel dramatic once Meghan stepped away from the house. It felt precise. The air was colder than she had expected, but not unbearable. The newborn remained still against her chest, wrapped in the hospital blanket, breathing in short, consistent rhythms that anchored her to something immediate and real. Behind her, the house settled back into itself, its light contained within walls that no longer defined her position. She did not stop at the edge of the driveway. She continued walking. Each step was measured, not hurried. There was no visible urgency in her movement, no outward sign of distress. To anyone watching from a distance, it might have looked like a woman taking a late walk with her child rather than someone who had just been removed from her home. But Meghan was not walking without direction. At the corner of the street, a black sedan waited with its engine running. The driver stepped out as she approached, his posture respectful, his expression neutral, in a way that suggested both awareness and discretion. "Miss Diaz," he said, opening the rear door. Meghan did not ask how he knew where to be. She nodded once and stepped inside. The door closed quietly behind her, sealing the warmth of the car around them. The driver returned to his seat without further comment, pulling away from the curb with a smooth, deliberate motion. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The car moved through familiar streets that gradually shifted into less recognizable ones. Streetlights passed in steady intervals, casting brief, repetitive patterns across the interior. Meghan adjusted the blanket again, ensuring the newborn remained secure. "Where are we going?" she asked finally. "A temporary residence has been arranged," the driver replied. His tone was professional, practiced. "Mr. Reeves asked that we bring you somewhere private and comfortable for the next few days." Meghan considered that. "Does Theodore know about this no?" The answer came without hesitation. She did not ask anything else. The building they arrived at did not announce itself. It was set back from the main road, its exterior understated, its entrance controlled. The kind of place designed for people who valued privacy over visibility. Inside, the transition was immediate. A quiet lobby, soft lighting, no unnecessary movement. A woman at the front desk looked up as they entered, her expression composed. "Miss Diaz," she said, "we've been expecting you." There was no request for identification, no questions. Everything had already been arranged. The elevator ride was brief. The hallway they stepped into was silent, the carpet absorbing the sound of their footsteps. The driver carried the small bag Meghan had brought, setting it down just inside the room before stepping back. "If you need anything, there is a number on the desk," he said. "Mr. Reeves will contact you in the morning." Meghan nodded. The door closed behind him. For the first time since leaving the house, there was no one else present. The room was larger than she needed. Clean, prepared. A crib had already been placed near the bed, assembled with care that suggested prior instruction. A small stack of supplies rested on a nearby table. Bottles, blankets, essentials, nothing excessive, everything considered. Meghan moved slowly through the space, not exploring but acknowledging. She placed the newborn gently into the crib, adjusting the blanket with precise movements before stepping back. The silence that followed was different from the silence in Theodore's house. It was not filled with expectation. It did not require her to respond. She sat down at the edge of the bed, her posture upright despite the fatigue that had begun to settle into her body. Her gaze moved to the desk where her phone now rested. It had continued to receive notifications throughout the drive. Missed calls, emails, messages marked with increasing urgency. Meghan reached for it. The screen lit up immediately, revealing a list that had grown longer in the hours since she had last looked. At the top, Daniel Reeves. She opened the most recent message. "Miss Diaz, we have confirmed your discharge and understand that you are no longer at the residence listed in prior records. For your safety and convenience, arrangements have been made. It is important that we speak at your earliest availability. There are time-sensitive matters related to the estate of Alejandro Diaz that require your direct authorization. All preliminary documents have been forwarded. Please review when possible. Non Daniel Reeves." Meghan read the message once. Then she opened the attachments. This time, she did not close them immediately. The first document was structured, formal, written in language that required attention. Trust agreements, transfer protocols, names of entities she recognized faintly now, connected in ways that were clearer than before. She read slowly. Not everything, but enough. A phrase appeared repeatedly across multiple pages. Primary beneficiary Meghan Diaz. Her gaze remained steady. There was no visible reaction, no sudden shift in posture. She continued reading. Another document outlined board transitions, voting rights, temporary custodial measures already in place, pending her formal confirmation. Another detailed asset protection structures noting specific conditions under which certain parties would be restricted from access. Names appeared. Some she knew, some she did not. All of them connected. Meghan set the phone down after several minutes, not because she had finished, but because she understood enough to proceed. The room remained still around her. The newborn shifted slightly in the crib, a small movement that drew Meghan's attention back. She stood moving closer, adjusting the blanket once more with the same care she had shown throughout the night. "You're fine," she said quietly. The words were not only for the child. She returned to the bed, sitting again, her posture unchanged. On the desk, the phone vibrated once more. This time, she answered immediately. "Miss Diaz, Daniel Reeves," said his voice measured as before. "I'm glad to hear you're safe. I've reviewed some of the documents," Meghan replied. There was a brief pause on the other end. "Then you understand the general position?" "Yes." Another pause, shorter this time. "We will need to meet," Daniel continued. "There are signatures required, and decisions." Meghan looked toward the crib. "When tomorrow, if possible? We can come to you, that's fine." "Very well. I'll confirm the time." The call ended. Meghan set the phone down again, her gaze remaining on it for a moment longer before shifting away. There was no rush in her movements, no outward sign of urgency, but the structure around her had changed. Not in a way that required announcement, not in a way that demanded reaction. Simply in the quiet certainty that what had been assumed about her position no longer applied. Across the city, in a house that still held its light, Theodore Bennett believed the situation had resolved itself. He believed the absence of resistance confirmed his decision. He believed Meghan would eventually return or fail or find herself limited by the constraints he had described. In the room where Meghan now sat, those constraints had already begun to dissolve. Not through confrontation, not through argument, but through documentation, through structure, through systems that did not rely on belief to be effective. Meghan Diaz leaned back slightly, allowing her body a brief moment of rest. Then she closed her eyes. Not to escape, but to prepare. Morning arrived without ceremony. There was no dramatic shift in the light, no sudden clarity that marked the beginning of something new. It came the way most things did in Meghan Diaz's life, quietly, precisely, without asking for attention. She woke before the newborn stirred. For a few seconds she remained still, adjusting to the unfamiliar ceiling above her. The room was silent in a way that did not feel empty. It felt contained, intentional. Every object in the space had been placed with purpose, and nothing required explanation. Then the baby moved. A small sound, barely more than a breath, pulled Meghan fully into the present. She stood, her body still recovering, but steady, and crossed the short distance to the crib. Her movements were efficient, practiced in a way that did not come from experience alone, but from a kind of internal discipline she had carried long before this moment. By the time the knock came at the door, the room was already in order. Meghan did not rush to answer it. She finished what she was doing first. Then, she walked to the door and opened it. Daniel Reeves stood on the other side, exactly as his voice had suggested he would be. Late 40s, composed, dressed in a dark suit that did not draw attention to itself. Behind him, a younger associate held a leather portfolio, her posture attentive but unobtrusive. "Miss Diaz," Daniel said. "Thank you for seeing us on short notice." Meghan stepped aside. "Come in." They entered without hesitation, their presence altering the room, not through volume, but through intent. The associate placed the portfolio on the desk, opening it with careful movements that revealed neatly arranged documents, each tabbed and labeled. Daniel did not sit immediately. "I want to begin by saying that I'm aware of the circumstances under which we're meeting," he said. "And I understand that this is not an ideal time. But there are elements of your father's estate that require your direct acknowledgement." Meghan nodded. "I've read some of what you sent." "That's good," he replied. "Then I won't start from the beginning. I'll clarify the parts that matter most right now." He gestured lightly to the documents. "Your father, Alejandro Diaz, structured his holdings through a series of layered entities. Most of them are controlled by a central trust, which has now transitioned to you as the primary beneficiary." The phrase was repeated without emphasis, as though it were simply a fact that did not require reaction. Meghan listened. "There are no co-beneficiaries with equal authority," Daniel continued. "There are advisory boards, there are fiduciary obligations, but ultimate control subject to legal compliance rests with you." The associate slid a document forward. "This outlines the current asset structure," she said quietly. Meghan glanced at it. The numbers were not presented as a single total. They were distributed across categories: real estate holdings in multiple states, equity positions in firms she recognized by name, even if she had never interacted with them directly, investment vehicles designed for long-term stability rather than immediate liquidity. She did not attempt to calculate the total. She did not need to. "Is everything already transferred?" she asked. "Yes," Daniel said. "The transition was initiated prior to your father's passing and completed upon confirmation of certain conditions. Those conditions have been met." "What conditions?" Daniel held her gaze. "Your father believed that timing mattered," he said. "He wanted to ensure that control passed to you at a moment when external pressures would not compromise your position. He also included provisions to protect you from interference." The word interference carried more weight than the rest. Meghan did not ask him to define it. "Certain individuals," Daniel continued, "are restricted from accessing or influencing these assets. That includes anyone without explicit authorization from you or from the trust's governing structure." He paused briefly. "That includes your husband." The statement was delivered without judgment. Meghan's expression did not change. Daniel continued. "There are also immediate actions we need to take. Signature confirmations, board notifications, temporary access adjustments to ensure that no unauthorized transactions occur." He indicated another set of documents. "These require your review and signature today." Meghan moved to the desk, taking a seat. She began reading, not quickly, not slowly, precisely. Daniel did not interrupt. The associate remained still prepared to answer questions, but not offering information unless requested. Minutes passed. The only sound in the room was the quiet turning of pages. At one point, the newborn shifted in the crib. Meghan's gaze moved briefly in that direction, confirming that everything was fine, before returning to the documents. When she reached the first signature line, she did not hesitate. She signed. The motion was controlled, deliberate, not symbolic, functional. One document led to another. Each signature altered something: access points, control structures, authority lines. Daniel observed without comment, but there was a subtle shift in his posture as the process continued. Not relief, not satisfaction, recognition. When the final document was signed, Meghan set the pen down. "What happens next?" she asked. Daniel closed the portfolio carefully. "Next, we formalize notifications," he said. "Board members will be informed. Financial institutions will update their records. Any pending transactions that require your authorization will be routed through our office." And Theodore Daniel considered the question for a moment. "Mr. Bennett will be notified where legally necessary," he said. but he will not be granted access to any aspect of this structure unless you choose to allow it. Meghan nodded. There was no immediate follow-up question. Daniel stepped back slightly, giving the space a sense of closure. There is one more thing, he added. The associate handed him a smaller document. This is a summary of properties currently under your direct control, he said, including the residence you were removed from last night. Meghan looked at the page. The address was familiar, but the ownership details were not what Theodore believed them to be. The property was not held in his name alone. It had been part of a broader acquisition years earlier, structured through one of the entities now under Meghan's authority. Daniel did not explain further. He did not need to. Meghan set the document down. I see. There was no triumph in her voice, no shift in tone, only acknowledgement. Daniel closed the portfolio fully. We'll handle the next steps, he said. If you need anything, you have my direct contact. He moved toward the door, the associate following. Before leaving, he paused. Your father trusted your judgment, he said. Everything he built was structured with that in mind. Then he stepped out. The door closed. The room returned to silence. Meghan remained seated for a moment longer, her gaze resting on the documents in front of her. Nothing about her posture suggested change. Nothing about her expression revealed what had just occurred. But the structure of her world had shifted entirely. Not in appearance, not yet, but in a way that would soon become impossible to ignore. Across the city, Theodore Bennett moved through his morning with the same confidence he had carried the night before. He checked his accounts. He reviewed his messages. He prepared for a day he believed would unfold according to his expectations. He did not know that the systems he relied on had already begun to move without him. He did not know that the house he stood in was no longer secured by the authority he assumed. He did not know that the woman he had dismissed as dependent now held the legal structure that defined his position. And Meghan, in a quiet room far from that house, stood and moved toward the crib. The newborn slept, unaware, unaffected. Meghan adjusted the blanket once more. Then she stepped back, not retreating, but observing. The morning began the way Theodore preferred, structured, predictable, and within his reach. He woke at the same time he always did. The house still quiet, the remnants of the previous night folded neatly into the background of his awareness. The gathering had dispersed without incident. Eleanor had left with a brief, approving nod. Clara had lingered just long enough to reinforce what she believed had been a necessary decision. Vanessa had stayed later than the others, her presence easy, unchallenged. By the time Theodore stepped into the kitchen, everything appeared in order. There was no sign of disruption, no trace of absence beyond the obvious. The upstairs remained still. The nursery door was open, the room untouched, prepared for a child who was no longer there. Theodore did not pause when he passed it. He moved forward, focused on the sequence of tasks that defined the start of his day. Coffee, phone, calendar. He checked his messages first. Several emails had arrived overnight. Nothing unusual. Work-related updates. A confirmation for a meeting later that afternoon. A follow-up from a client regarding a pending financing structure. He opened the most recent one. Subject account access adjustment. The language was formal, concise. Please be advised that certain permissions associated with your profile have been temporarily modified pending review. For further information, contact your account representative. Theodore frowned slightly. He read it again. Then he moved to the next message. Subject transaction pending authorization. This one referenced a payment he had initiated the previous evening. A routine transfer. It had not gone through. He set the phone down for a moment, considering. It was not uncommon for systems to flag transactions for verification. It happened occasionally, especially with larger amounts. There were protocols, security measures, nothing that required concern. He picked up the phone again, and opened his banking application. The interface loaded without delay. The balance appeared as expected. But when he navigated to the transaction history, there was a small notation beside the pending transfer. Authorization required. Theodore tapped the notification. A message appeared. This transaction requires additional approval. Please contact your administrator. Administrator. The word did not align with his understanding of the account. He was the administrator. He had set it up that way years ago, consolidating their finances under structures that ensured efficiency and control. There had never been a need for external approval. He exited the application and reopened it. The message remained unchanged. Theodore exhaled slowly, his expression tightening just enough to register irritation. A temporary glitch, he told himself. Systems updated. Permissions shifted. It would resolve. He moved on. The rest of the morning unfolded with minor interruptions that did not yet form a pattern. A call to his assistant went unanswered longer than usual. When she did return, her tone was slightly more formal than he expected. There's been a request for updated documentation on the Halstead property, she said. They're asking for confirmation of ownership structure. Theodore leaned back slightly in his chair. Why, he asked, I'm not sure. The request came through legal. From our side, no, she replied. External. Theodore considered that. I'll handle it, he said. He ended the call. It was not unusual for external parties to request documentation. Due diligence processes often required verification. It did not indicate a problem. He stood moving through the house with the same controlled pace he maintained in all things. The silence no longer felt neutral. It felt incomplete. He noticed it then, not as absence, but as deviation. The absence of sound he had not previously registered. The absence of movement. The absence of someone who until the night before had occupied the space without demanding attention. Meghan. The thought surfaced without weight. She would need time, he told himself. Time to adjust, time to understand the position she had been placed in. It was not unreasonable to expect a delay before she responded. She would reach out. They always did. Theodore returned to the kitchen, picking up his phone again. He opened their message thread. There was nothing new. He typed a message. Let me know when you're ready to talk. We should handle this properly. He paused for a moment, then sent it. The message delivered without issue. No response. He set the phone down again. A second email notification appeared. Subject access notification. Immediate review required. This one came from a financial institution he worked with regularly. He opened it. Mr. Bennett. We have received notice of changes affecting account governance associated with your profile. Certain privileges have been adjusted in accordance with updated authorization protocols. For clarification, please contact your designated representative. Theodore's jaw tightened slightly. This was no longer a single system issue. He opened the contact information and initiated a call. The line connected quickly. Good morning, this is Laura, a voice answered. How can I assist you? This is Theodore Bennett, he said. I've received notifications about changes to my account access. I need to understand what's happening. There was a brief pause. Of course, Mr. Bennett, Laura replied. Let me pull up your profile. Theodore waited, his gaze fixed on the counter in front of him. I see the update, she said after a moment. It appears that administrative control has been reassigned. To who, he asked. Another pause. I'm not authorized to provide that information directly, she said. But I can confirm that the change was initiated through proper legal channels. Theodore's expression hardened. That's not possible, he said. I am the administrator. I understand your concern. Laura replied, her tone unchanged. However, the current structure reflects the most recent authorization on file. And who authorized it? I would recommend contacting your legal representative for further clarification. The call ended shortly after. Theodore set the phone down more firmly this time. The irritation that had been contained began to shift into something else. Not panic, not yet, but something closer to recognition. He moved toward his office, a space he had arranged to reflect control. Clean lines, organized files, systems that responded when he engaged them. He powered on his computer, accessing internal records. Documents opened, accounts loaded, and within those systems, small changes began to reveal themselves. Access points he no longer held, permissions that had shifted, structures that no longer aligned with what he had established. He leaned back slightly, his gaze narrowing. This was not random. This was coordinated. The realization did not arrive all at once. It unfolded in pieces, each one precise, each one undeniable. Theodore reached for his phone again. This time, he did not open his email. He opened Meghan's contact. He initiated a call. The line rang. Once, twice. Then went to voicemail. He ended the call without leaving a message. For a moment, he remained still. Then he stood. The house around him no longer felt entirely his. Not in the way it had the night before. Not in the way he had assumed it would remain. Across the city, in a quiet room designed for privacy, Meghan Diaz sat near the window, the newborn resting nearby. Her phone rested on the table beside her. It vibrated once. She looked at the screen. Theodore Bennett. Missed call. She did not reach for it immediately. Instead, she turned her attention back to the document in front of her, reviewing a section she had marked earlier. Then, after a moment, she picked up the phone. She did not return the call. She did not send a message. She placed it back down and continued reading. By late morning, the house no longer felt like it had the night before. Theodore noticed it in the small ways first. The kitchen, once a place of routine, now carried a quiet tension that did not belong to its design. The surfaces were clean, the light was steady, but something beneath the structure had shifted. Not visibly, not in a way that could be pointed to, but in a way that altered how each movement settled into the space. Eleanor Bennett arrived just before noon. She did not knock. She never did. Her presence filled the entryway with the same composed certainty she carried into every room. She set her handbag down with controlled precision, her gaze moving briefly across the interior as though confirming that everything remained as it should. "It's quiet," she said. Theodore, standing near the counter, did not respond immediately. "She left," he said after a moment. Eleanor nodded once. "Yes," she replied. "I assumed she would." There was no hesitation in her tone. No curiosity about where Meghan had gone. No concern about how she was managing. The absence of those questions was not an oversight. It was a position. Clara arrived shortly after. Her entrance was lighter, less controlled, but no less deliberate. She moved into the room with a kind of casual energy that masked the attentiveness beneath it. "So," she said, dropping her keys onto the counter, "it's done." Theodore glanced at her. "Yes." Clara exhaled a short sound that could have been relief. "Good," she said. It was overdue. Eleanor remained near the window, her posture unchanged. "This house needed clarity," she added. "And now it has it." Theodore did not disagree. From their perspective, the situation had resolved itself. A problem had been identified. A decision had been made. An outcome had been executed. What remained was adjustment. And adjustment, in Eleanor's experience, always favored those who maintained control. Vanessa Cole arrived last. She did not announce herself with noise. She entered quietly, her presence aligning with the rhythm of the room, as though she had already been part of it. She greeted Eleanor with a brief nod, Clara with a familiar glance, and Theodore with a look that held just enough reassurance to be noticed. "You're all right," she asked him. Theodore nodded. "It's handled." Vanessa did not ask for details. She did not need them. From where she stood, the outcome was already clear. The conversation shifted easily after that. Plans were discussed, not in formal terms, but in the language of assumption. "How long do you think she'll stay away?" Clara asked, leaning against the counter. Theodore considered the question. "She doesn't have many options," he said. "A few days, maybe, a week." And then Clara pressed. "She'll reach out," he replied. "We'll figure out the terms." The word terms was used without reflection. Eleanor nodded in agreement. "She'll realize what she's losing," she said. "Stability matters." Vanessa remained quiet, her gaze moving briefly toward Theodore. "And the baby?" she asked. Theodore's expression shifted slightly, but only for a moment. "The baby stays with her for now," he said. "It's simpler. The words settled into the conversation without challenge. No one questioned the practicality of separating a newborn from the environment it had just entered. No one suggested that the situation required reconsideration. From their perspective, simplicity aligned with control. Clara reached for a glass, filling it halfway. "Well," she said lightly, "at least now things can move forward?" Eleanor glanced at her. "Yes," she agreed, "they can." For a while, the room returned to something resembling normal. Conversations drifted toward other topics: work, social plans, events that had nothing to do with the absence that remained unacknowledged in the background. But the shift did not remain contained for long. It began with a small interruption. Clara's phone buzzed against the counter. She glanced at it, her expression neutral at first. Then it changed. "Did your card get declined this morning?" she asked suddenly, looking up at Theodore. Theodore frowned slightly. "No." Clara held up her phone. "I tried to pay for something earlier. It didn't go through. I thought it was just the machine." Eleanor turned from the window. "What card?" "The one tied to the house account," Clara said. "The one Theo set up?" Theodore's expression tightened. "It's probably a verification issue," he said. "It happens." Clara did not look convinced. "It's never happened before." Eleanor stepped closer, her attention sharpening. "Call the bank," she said. Theodore shook his head. "I already did," he replied. "They said there were adjustments, nothing permanent." "Adjustments," Eleanor repeated. "To permissions," Theodore said. "It's being reviewed." Eleanor's gaze held his. "By who?" Theodore did not answer immediately. "I'm looking into it," he said finally. The room grew quieter. Vanessa set her glass down carefully. "That doesn't sound routine," she said. "It is," Theodore replied, though his tone lacked the certainty it had carried earlier. Clara checked her phone again. "There's something else," she said. "The payment for the Halstead property, did you send it?" "Yes, it didn't go through." Theodore's jaw tightened. "I'll fix it." Eleanor remained still, her posture unchanged but her focus sharper. "This needs to be resolved quickly," she said. "We can't have disruptions." Theodore nodded. "I know." But the words did not carry the same weight they had before. He reached for his phone again, scrolling through messages, searching for clarity that did not present itself easily. Another notification appeared. He opened it. His expression changed. "What is it?" Clara asked. Theodore did not respond immediately. He read the message once, then again. "It's from one of the firms," he said. "And they're delaying a contract review," he replied. "They need to reassess alignment with ownership structures." The phrase lingered. Eleanor frowned. "What does that mean?" Theodore looked up. "It means they're hesitating." "Why?" He did not answer, because the answer was not yet clear, not fully, but it was beginning to take shape. Across the city, in a room that remained quiet and controlled, Meghan Diaz sat at the desk reviewing another set of documents. Her phone rested beside her. It vibrated once. She glanced at the screen. Another missed call from Theodore. Another message. She did not open it. Instead, she turned the page in front of her, her attention returning to the structure that now defined her position. The newborn slept nearby, undisturbed. The room remained steady. And while the house Theodore stood in began to feel less certain with each passing hour, Meghan did not move toward him. She did not respond. She did not explain. She allowed the space between them to widen, not through distance alone, but through understanding. The envelope arrived just after 2 in the afternoon. It did not draw attention to itself. There was no courier waiting at the door. No signature required in front of an audience, no urgency in the delivery. It had been placed in the mailbox with the rest of the day's correspondence, indistinguishable from the ordinary, until Theodore picked it up and felt the weight of it. It was heavier than the others. The return address was printed in clean, formal lettering, Reeves & Klein, LLP. Theodore paused for a moment in the entryway, the rest of the mail still in his hand. Eleanor and Clara were in the living room. Vanessa had stepped out earlier, her absence leaving the house quieter but not calmer. He did not open the envelope immediately. Instead, he walked into his office, closing the door behind him with more care than usual. The space once defined by control now felt narrower, as though its boundaries had shifted in ways he had not authorized. He set the rest of the mail aside. Then he opened the envelope. Inside, the documents were arranged with precision. No excess pages, no unnecessary language. The first page carried a header that required no interpretation. Formal notice of representation and immediate legal action. Theodore's gaze moved across the text. This firm represents Miss Meghan Elena Diaz in all matters related to her personal, financial, and legal interests, effective immediately. The wording was neutral, clinical. It did not accuse. It did not suggest. It stated. He continued reading. Be advised that actions taken on the evening of date, involving the removal of Miss Diaz and her newborn child from the residence located at address, have been documented and are subject to review under applicable state and federal statutes. Theodore's grip on the paper tightened slightly. The language did not escalate. It did not need to. Each sentence carried its own weight. You are hereby instructed to preserve all forms of communication, including but not limited to electronic messages, audio recordings, and surveillance footage related to the aforementioned incident. Any attempt to alter, delete, or otherwise interfere with such materials may constitute a violation of legal obligations. Theodore exhaled slowly. This was not a warning. It was a boundary. He turned the page. Additionally, all financial accounts, properties, and associated assets connected to Miss Diaz are subject to immediate review. Unauthorized access or attempts to initiate transactions without proper authorization will be considered actionable. The phrase repeated. Unauthorized. Theodore's mind moved quickly, tracing the implications. Accounts, properties, access. He reached the final page. There was no demand for immediate response, no request for negotiation, only contact information and a closing line. All future communication regarding these matters should be directed through this office. Theodore lowered the document slightly, his gaze remaining fixed on the text. For a moment, the room felt still in a way that was different from before. Not quiet, contained. He set the papers down on the desk, aligning them carefully as though the act of ordering them might restore some clarity to what they represented. Then he stood. When he opened the office door, Eleanor looked up immediately. "What is it?" she asked. Theodore did not answer right away. He walked into the living room, the documents in his hand. "It's from a law firm," he said. Clara straightened slightly. About what? Theodore handed the first page to Eleanor. She read it quickly, her expression tightening as she moved through the text. "This is—" she began, then stopped. Clara stepped closer, reading over her shoulder. "They're threatening legal action," she said. "They're not threatening," Theodore replied. "They're stating." Eleanor looked up. "On what grounds?" Theodore did not need to think about the answer. "Last night." Clara frowned. "That's ridiculous," she said. "You told her to leave." She agreed. Theodore's gaze shifted briefly. "That's not how it's written." Eleanor handed the document back. "This can be handled," she said. "You'll respond, clarify the situation." Theodore nodded slightly, though the movement lacked conviction. "It's not just that," he said. He moved to the second page, pointing to a section. "They're reviewing financial access." Clara's expression changed. "What does that mean?" "It means they're already looking at the accounts," Theodore said. Eleanor's posture stiffened. "They don't have the authority to do that," she said. Theodore did not respond immediately, because he had already begun to understand that they did, not through assumption, through structure, through whatever Meghan had not said. Clara crossed her arms. "This is a tactic," she said. "They're trying to pressure you." "Maybe," Theodore replied. But the word did not settle. Eleanor moved toward the window again, her movements more deliberate now. "Call your lawyer," she said. "We need a response." Theodore nodded. "I will." He returned to the office, closing the door again, this time more firmly. He reached for his phone, scrolling to a contact he had not needed to use in months. The line connected after 2 rings. "This is Mark Ellison," a voice answered. "Mark, it's Theodore Bennett," he said. "I need you to review something." There was a brief pause. "Of course," Mark replied. "What's going on?" Theodore looked at the documents on his desk. "I just received a formal notice," he said, "from a firm representing my wife." Another pause. "All right," Mark said. "Send it over." Theodore scanned the pages quickly, forwarding them without delay. Seconds passed, then a minute. When Mark spoke again, his tone had changed. "This isn't informal," he said. "I'm aware." "They've already established representation," Mark continued. "And they're referencing documentation." Theodore leaned back slightly. "What kind of documentation, I don't know yet," Mark replied. "But they wouldn't send this without it." Theodore's gaze moved to the section referencing financial access. "They're also mentioning account control," he said. Mark was quiet for a moment. "Have you noticed any changes?" he asked. "Yes." Another pause. "Then this is already in motion," Mark said. Theodore's jaw tightened. "What do? We proceed carefully," Mark replied. "No direct contact, no responses without review." "And Theodore?" He stopped. "What?" Theodore asked. "Do not assume you understand the full scope of what's happening." The line went quiet for a moment. Theodore did not respond. Because for the first time since the night before, the certainty he had relied on was no longer intact. Across the city, Meghan Diaz sat at the same desk, the same documents now organized into a structured sequence. Her phone remained within reach. It vibrated once. A message appeared. "Theodore Bennett. We need to talk. This has gone too far." Meghan looked at it. She did not open the thread. Instead, she reached for a different document, one that outlined the next set of legal steps. Her attention did not return to the message. Not immediately, not urgently, because the conversation Theodore was asking for had already moved beyond words. It had entered a space defined by process. And in that space, Meghan did not need to speak. By the time Theodore Bennett stepped into his office building that afternoon, the world had not changed in any visible way. The lobby remained polished, the glass doors reflecting the same controlled environment he had moved through for years. The receptionist greeted him with the same practiced professionalism. Elevators opened and closed on schedule. Conversations carried in low tones that suggested routine rather than disruption. But the systems beneath that surface had already begun to shift. Theodore moved through the space. With his usual confidence, his posture unchanged, his pace measured. From the outside, nothing suggested that the structure he relied on had been compromised. He entered his office, setting his briefcase down, and immediately turned to his computer. There were emails waiting, more than usual. He opened the first one. Subject: contract review, temporary hold. The message was concise. Due to recent updates in ownership alignment, we are pausing all further review of the Halstead financing agreement pending clarification. Theodore read it once. Then again. Ownership alignment. The phrase appeared again. He opened the next email. Subject: meeting reschedule request. We will need to postpone today's discussion until additional documentation is provided regarding controlling interests. Theodore's expression remained controlled, but the precision of it required effort now. He leaned back slightly, considering. This was no longer isolated. This was coordination. He reached for his phone and dialed his assistant. Emily, he said when she answered, what's happening with the Halstead deal? There was a brief pause on the other end. They're requesting verification, she replied. They said something about ownership structures not matching prior filings. That doesn't make sense, Theodore said. Everything is in order. That's what I told them, Emily said. But they're asking for updated documentation. Theodore's gaze moved to the window. I'll handle it, he said, ending the call. He stood moving to the cabinet where he kept physical copies of key agreements. He pulled out a folder labeled Halstead, flipping it open with practiced efficiency. The documents were exactly as he remembered them. Clean, complete, authorized. He returned to his desk, scanning through the digital versions again, searching for discrepancies that did not appear. There were none. Which meant the issue was not in the documents. It was in the structure behind them. Theodore's phone buzzed. A message from Mark Ellison. We need to talk. He called immediately. What did you find? Theodore asked. Mark did not answer right away. I've started looking into the firm representing your wife, he said. Reeves and Klein. They don't take cases like this lightly. Theodore leaned forward slightly. That doesn't tell me what's happening. No, Mark replied. But this might. There was a brief pause. Have you ever heard of Alejandro Diaz? The name settled into the space between them. Theodore frowned. That's Meghan's father, he said. He wasn't involved. Another pause. That's not accurate, Mark said. Theodore's grip tightened on the phone. Explain. I've been tracing some of the entities referenced in the notice, Mark continued. They connect back to a larger structure. Investment firms, real estate holdings, private equity positions. Theodore said nothing. They're all tied to one central trust, Mark added. And that trust is now under Meghan's control. The words did not land immediately. They moved through Theodore's understanding in pieces, each one requiring adjustment. That's not possible, he said. It is, Mark replied. And it's already been executed. Theodore stood moving away from the desk, his gaze unfocused for a moment, as he processed the information. You're telling me she controls what exactly? I don't have a full valuation yet, Mark said. But it's significant. Very significant. Theodore exhaled slowly. This doesn't make sense, he said. She didn't need to. Mark interrupted. This wasn't about visibility. It was about structure. Theodore's mind moved quickly, connecting fragments. The emails, the account changes, the contract delays. "Halstead," he said. "Yes," Mark replied. "That's one of the connections." Theodore turned back toward the desk, his movements sharper now. "That deal runs through a financing group," he said. They answer to the structure above them," Mark said. "And that structure now includes your wife." Theodore stopped. For a moment the room felt smaller, more contained. "What does that mean for me?" he asked. "It means your position is exposed," Mark said. "Not just legally, professionally." Theodore's gaze moved to the screen, to the emails that now carried a different meaning. "They're pausing contracts," he said. "Yes." "They're asking for ownership verification." "Yes." "They're pulling back." Mark did not respond, because the answer was already clear. Theodore ended the call without another word. He stood there for a moment, the phone still in his hand. Then he moved back to the desk, opening a new message. "To Halstead Group. We need to proceed as scheduled. Any concerns regarding ownership can be addressed directly with me." He paused, then deleted it. Because for the first time, he was no longer certain that statement was true. Across the city, Meghan Diaz sat in a conference room that did not belong to her in name, but responded to her presence without question. Daniel Reeves stood across from her, reviewing a set of updated reports. "These are the entities currently intersecting with your husband's professional activity," he said, sliding a document forward. Meghan looked at it. The names aligned, the structures connected, not dramatically, but precisely. "He doesn't know," she said. "No," Daniel replied. "He wouldn't have needed to." Meghan's gaze remained on the page. "And now," she asked. "Now he will start to see it," Daniel said. "Not all at once, but in pieces." Meghan nodded. She did not ask for acceleration. She did not request intervention. She simply acknowledged the process. The room remained quiet, controlled. Outside, the systems continued to adjust. Contracts paused, permissions shifted, access narrowed. Not through confrontation, not through announcement, but through alignment. And in that alignment, the position Theodore had relied on began to dissolve. Not visibly, not yet, but in a way that could no longer be ignored. The evidence did not arrive all at once. It surfaced the way structure prefers to reveal itself, piece by piece, each fragment precise enough to stand on its own, each one aligned with the next, until a pattern could no longer be denied. Theodore Bennett saw the first shift in language. Not in a courtroom, not in a formal setting, in an email. It came from Mark Ellison late that evening, its subject line deliberately neutral. Subject materials review? Immediate. Theodore opened it without delay. There were attachments, several, each labeled in a way that suggested order rather than urgency. He clicked on the first. A still image appeared on the screen. It took him a moment to recognize it. The angle was slightly elevated, the frame fixed, the lighting consistent. A security camera, his security camera. The entryway of his own house. The timestamp was visible in the corner. The previous night. He leaned closer to the screen. The image captured a moment he remembered clearly, but not in this way. Not from this perspective. He saw himself standing in the doorway, his posture rigid, his expression set. Meghan stood a few feet away, the newborn held close against her chest. The porch light cast a harsh clarity over both of them, removing any softness from the scene. Theodore did not remember how still she had been. He did not remember how much space there had been between them. He clicked to the next file. This one moved. Video. No sound at first. Then, after a moment, the audio engaged. The voices were clearer than he expected. Not distorted, not distant. Precise. His own voice carried through the recording, steady, controlled, unmistakable. This arrangement needs to end. He watched himself speak the words. He heard the tone. There was no anger in it. No visible escalation. Only certainty. He watched Meghan respond. Minimal movement, no raised voice. "And the baby?" she asked. Theodore's hand tightened on the mouse. He remembered the exchange, but he had not remembered the pacing, the pauses, the way the silence between sentences held its own weight. He clicked forward. Another angle. The living room. Eleanor standing near the doorway. Clara partially visible. Vanessa near the window. All present, all silent. No one intervened. No one questioned. Theodore leaned back slightly. He closed the file, then opened the next. A series of messages appeared. Text threads. His number. Meghan's number. Dates aligned. Timestamps consistent. He scrolled. Short messages, direct. Some he remembered sending. Others he did not recall as clearly. Statements about finances, about access, about what she did and did not have. He paused on one. "You don't have independent funds. Whatever you do next, you'll need to figure it out on your own." The words looked different in isolation, stripped of context, stripped of tone. They did not require interpretation. He closed the thread. Another file, audio. This one shorter. Captured from a different source, the entryway again. Voices overlapping slightly, but still clear enough. Clara's voice. Light, casual. "It's overdue." Eleanor's voice followed. Measured. This house needed clarity. Theodore did not listen further. He stopped the recording. The room around him remained unchanged. The desk, the chair, the same controlled environment he had relied on for years. But the material on the screen did not belong to that environment. It existed independently, unaffected by his perception. His phone buzzed. A message from Mark. "There's more. Review all of it before responding to anything." Theodore did not reply. He returned to the files. Each one added something. A doorbell camera capturing the moment Meghan stepped onto the porch. A neighbor's camera from across the street showing the same scene from a different angle. The consistency between them removed any possibility of dispute. The narrative did not need to be argued. It presented itself. Theodore moved through the materials slowly, not because he lacked the ability to process them, but because each piece required adjustment, not to the facts, to his understanding of them. Across the city, Meghan Diaz reviewed the same files, but her process was different. She did not start with the video. She began with the index Daniel had provided, a structured list of materials each categorized by source, time, and relevance. "Everything has been verified?" Daniel said, standing across from her. "Chain of custody is intact. There are no gaps." Meghan nodded. She opened the first file. The entryway, the same angle Theodore had seen. But she did not watch it all the way through. She noted the timestamp, the positioning, the presence of others, then moved on. The next file, audio. She listened briefly, enough to confirm clarity, enough to understand tone. Then she closed it. Her movements were efficient, not detached, focused. She was not revisiting the moment. She was cataloging it. Daniel observed without interruption. "This will form the basis of the initial filing," he said. "We won't use everything immediately, only what's necessary." Meghan looked up. "Why not all of it?" "Because precision matters more than volume," Daniel replied. "We present what establishes the facts. The rest remains available if needed." Meghan considered that, then nodded. She returned to the documents. Another file, messages. She read them without hesitation. Each one familiar, each one preserved exactly as it had been sent. She did not react to them. She did not pause. She moved through them as she would any other record. When she reached the final page, she closed the file. "What's next?" she asked. Daniel stepped forward, placing another document on the table. "We proceed with the next phase," he said. "Formal filings, temporary orders, financial protections." Meghan's gaze moved to the page. The structure was clear, defined. There were no uncertainties. "And Theodore?" she asked. Daniel paused briefly. "He will respond," he said, "but his response won't change the record." Meghan nodded. She did not ask what he would say, because it no longer mattered. Back in his office, Theodore sat in silence. The screen in front of him remained active. The final video paused at a frame that captured the moment Meghan stepped away from the door. The newborn in her arms, the porch light above, the space between them. He stared at it for a long moment, then closed the file. The room returned to stillness. But it was no longer the same stillness. It carried weight, not from what had happened, but from how clearly it had been preserved. Theodore reached for his phone, opened Meghan's contact, typed a message, stopped, deleted it, set the phone down. For the first time, he understood that words would not move what had already been established. Across the city, Meghan placed the final document back into the folder, aligned it, closed it. Then she stood moving toward the crib. The newborn slept, unaffected. Meghan adjusted the blanket once more. Her movements remained the same. Calm, measured, unchanged. But the structure around her had solidified. And in that structure, nothing needed to be said. Because everything that mattered had already been recorded. The next phase did not announce itself with raised voices or public scenes. It began with filings, quiet, methodical, and exact. By midweek, documents had been submitted in the appropriate jurisdiction, each one structured to establish facts rather than arguments. There were no dramatic claims, no unnecessary language. Every line was supported by something already preserved, timestamps, records, confirmations. The system did not require persuasion. It required clarity. Meghan Diaz signed what needed to be signed. Not quickly, not slowly, precisely. Daniel Reeves sat across from her reviewing each page before it moved forward. His associate managed the sequence, ensuring that nothing was out of order, that each submission aligned with the next. There was no confusion in the process, no hesitation. The structure had been prepared long before Meghan stepped into the room. "These are the initial protections," Daniel said, indicating the first set of documents. "They're designed to establish stability, not outcome." Meghan nodded. She read the headings: temporary custodial safeguards, financial access restriction, preservation of property status. Each phrase was deliberate. None of them implied finality. They created space. "What happens after this?" Meghan asked. "We wait for response," Daniel replied. "Then we proceed." Meghan signed. Across the city, Theodore Bennett sat in a conference room that no longer felt entirely aligned with him. His lawyer, Mark Ellison, had arranged the meeting early before the day could accumulate further complications. The table between them was covered with printed materials, copies of the same notice Theodore had received, along with additional filings that had arrived since. Mark did not begin immediately. He allowed Theodore to look, to read, to absorb. When he spoke, his tone was measured. "They've filed for temporary protections," he said. "Custody, financial boundaries, property status." Theodore's gaze remained on the documents. "This is excessive," he said. "It's precise," Mark replied. Theodore looked up. "I didn't," he began, then stopped. Because the explanation he had prepared no longer aligned with what was in front of him, Mark continued. "The evidence they've submitted supports their position," he said. "It's not emotional, it's structured." Theodore leaned back slightly. They're framing it like I forced her out, he said. Mark did not respond immediately. They don't need to frame it, he said finally. They've documented it. Theodore's jaw tightened. And the financial side. Mark turned a page. They've initiated a review of all accounts connected to her, he said, which based on what we now know includes more than you initially understood. Theodore said nothing. Access has already been adjusted, Mark added. That's not something we can reverse quickly. Theodore's gaze moved to the section outlining property. The house, he said. Mark followed his line of sight. They've filed to preserve its status, he said. No changes, no transfers, no new claims until the matter is resolved. Theodore exhaled slowly. That's my house. Mark did not challenge the statement directly. It's more complicated than that, he said. Theodore's silence held. Mark continued. There are layers of ownership we didn't account for, he said. Entities connected to her father's estate. Those structures are now active. Theodore looked down at the table. Down. For the first time, the word complicated did not feel like an obstacle he could navigate. It felt like a boundary. Back in the quiet room where Meghan sat, the process continued without interruption. Daniel reviewed a second set of documents. These will be submitted after the initial response, he said. They build on what we've already established. Meghan listened. What about custody? She asked. Daniel glanced at the file. The court will prioritize stability, he said, given the circumstances that aligns with your position. Meghan nodded. There was no visible relief, only acknowledgement. And Theodore? She asked. Daniel paused. He will have the opportunity to respond, he said. But his response will be evaluated against the record. Meghan did not ask what that response might be, because she understood that the system did not respond to tone, it responded to consistency. The newborn shifted in the crib. A small sound, brief and contained. Meghan stood moving toward the crib, adjusting the blanket with the same measured care she had shown each time before. The process did not stop for that movement. It continued. In parallel. In structure. Across the city, Theodore returned home later than usual. The house felt different now. Not because anything had changed physically, but because the assumptions that had defined it no longer held. Eleanor sat in the living room, her posture as composed as ever, though her attention sharpened when he entered. Well, she asked. Theodore set his briefcase down. They filed, he said. Eleanor's expression tightened slightly. For what protections? He replied. Custody, financial access, property. Clara, seated nearby, leaned forward. They can't just do that, she said. They already have, Theodore said. Eleanor stood. This needs to be challenged, she said, immediately. Theodore nodded, though the movement lacked its usual certainty. It will be, he said. But the words did not carry the same weight they once had. Clara crossed her arms. This is just pressure, she said. They're trying to push you into a settlement. Theodore did not respond, because the structure of what he had seen that day did not resemble pressure. It resembled alignment. Eleanor moved toward the window, her gaze fixed outward. She won't be able to sustain this, she said. Not without support. Theodore looked at her. She has support, he said. The statement settled into the room. Clara frowned. From who? Theodore did not answer, because the answer was no longer simple. Across the city, Meghan returned to the desk. The documents were arranged in order. Nothing out of place, nothing incomplete. She sat, her posture steady, her attention focused. Daniel closed the final file. That's everything for today, he said. Meghan nodded. She did not ask how long it would take. She did not ask what the outcome would be, because the process had already begun to define itself. And within that process, there was no need for urgency. only consistency. Outside, the systems continued to adjust. Filings moved through channels. Notifications reached the appropriate parties. Access points remained restricted, not through force, but through structure. And in that structure, the space around Theodore Bennett continued to narrow, not visibly, not yet, but in a way that left less and less room for assumption. The message did not come through the channels Mark had advised. It arrived late after the house had settled into its usual quiet, after Eleanor had returned to her own routines, and Clara had stopped calling every hour to ask for updates that no longer existed. Theodore sat alone in his office. The lights dimmed just enough to reflect the hour without acknowledging it. He opened his phone. There were no new emails that required immediate response. No updates from Mark. No notifications that altered the structure already in motion. Only the message he had been drafting for several minutes. He read it again. "We need to talk, not through lawyers, just you and me. This isn't how it should end." He did not send it. He deleted it, started again. "Meghan, I think things have gone further than either of us intended. We should sit down and figure out what makes sense moving forward, for the baby." He paused. The phrasing felt controlled, reasonable, incomplete. He deleted it again. The third attempt came without structure. "I didn't mean for it to go this way." He stared at the words. They did not carry the certainty he had relied on, but they carried something else. He sent it. The message delivered. No response. Theodore set the phone down, his gaze remaining on it for a moment longer than necessary. The silence that followed was not new. It had been present for days now, widening with each unanswered call, each unread message. He stood moving toward the window. The street outside remained unchanged. The same quiet neighborhood, the same steady rhythm. Nothing in that view reflected the shift that had taken place. But Theodore no longer expected it to. Across the city, Meghan Diaz sat near the window of the temporary residence, the newborn resting in the crib behind her. Her phone rested on the table. It vibrated once. She looked at the screen. Theodore Bennett. "I didn't mean for it to go this way." She read it, once, then again. There was no immediate reaction, no change in posture, no visible shift in expression. She placed the phone back down, not face down, not hidden, simply returned to the surface. Daniel Reeves sat across from her, reviewing a set of updated filings. "You don't need to respond," he said without looking up. Meghan's gaze remained on the window. "I know." There was a brief pause. Then she spoke. "He wants to speak directly." Daniel closed the file. "That's expected," he said. "At this stage, it usually is." Meghan turned slightly, her attention moving back to the table. "What would change if I did?" Daniel considered the question. "From a legal perspective?" he asked. "Yes." "Nothing," he replied. "The process continues regardless of conversation." Meghan nodded. And outside of that, Daniel paused. "That depends on what you're looking for," he said. Meghan did not answer immediately, because the question was not about what Theodore wanted. It was about what she no longer needed. Back in his office, Theodore picked up the phone again. No response. He opened the message thread. The last visible interaction was from days earlier, before the house, before the night, before everything had shifted into structure. He typed again. "I understand if you don't want to talk, but I think we should at least try to resolve this without making it worse than it already is." He hesitated, then sent it. The message delivered. No response. He exhaled slowly, setting the phone down again. This time, he did not reach for it immediately. Instead, he moved back to the desk, opening a folder Mark had left earlier. Inside were notes, potential responses, strategies, all structured around the same premise. Proceed carefully. Do not escalate. Do not assume. Theodore read through them, his attention focused but not entirely aligned. Because the process outlined in those pages did not include what he was attempting, it did not account for direct appeal. It did not prioritize conversation. It relied on structure, and for the first time, Theodore found himself outside of that structure. Across the city, Meghan stood moving toward the crib. The newborn shifted slightly, the small movement drawing her attention away from the phone, away from the message that remained unanswered. She adjusted the blanket, checked the position, ensured everything remained as it should be. Then she stepped back. Her movements remained unchanged, measured, controlled, consistent. She returned to the table. Daniel watched her for a moment, then spoke. "There will likely be a request for a private meeting," he said. "Through counsel?" Meghan nodded. "And if I agree, we attend," Daniel replied. "We listen, we document." Meghan's gaze moved to the phone again. The message remained on the screen, unanswered. She reached for it, opened the thread, read both messages. Her thumb hovered briefly over the keyboard, then moved away. She closed the thread, placed the phone back down, not as refusal, not as avoidance, as decision. Back in the house, Theodore remained in his office. The silence around him had changed. It was no longer something he could ignore. It was something he had to move through. He reached for the phone one more time, scrolled to Meghan's contact, paused, then set it down again. Because the response he was waiting for was not coming. Not in the way he expected. Not in the way he had always relied on. Theodore leaned back in his chair, his gaze moving across the room. For a moment, he allowed himself to consider something he had not acknowledged before. That the position he had assumed, the control he had exercised, the certainty he had carried, had not been shared, had not been accepted, had only been allowed, and that allowance had ended. Across the city, Meghan sat in the same position. The documents remained in front of her. The structure remained intact. Nothing required immediate action. Nothing demanded response. The process would continue, with or without conversation. She picked up the pen, reviewed the next page, signed where necessary, then placed the pen down. Her gaze did not return to the phone, not immediately, not urgently, because the answer Theodore was asking for, the closure he was attempting to reach, did not exist in a message. It existed in the space she had already chosen, and in that space she did not need to explain. The consequences did not arrive with noise. They appeared in confirmations. By the end of the week, the systems Theodore Bennett had relied on no longer responded the way they once had. Not in a single visible collapse, but in a sequence of denials, pauses, and quiet refusals that accumulated into something he could not redirect. It began with a call from Halstead. The number appeared on his screen just after 9 in the morning. He answered immediately. "This is Theodore." There was a brief pause on the other end, followed by a voice he recognized but had never heard hesitate before. "Mr. Bennett, this is Karen Whitmore. I'm calling regarding the financing agreement." Theodore leaned forward slightly. "Yes, I've been expecting an update." Another pause. "We've completed our internal review," Karen said. "Given the recent clarification regarding controlling interests, we will not be proceeding with your involvement in the current structure." Theodore's grip on the phone tightened. "On what basis?" he asked. "Our compliance team has determined that the alignment between your position and the governing entities does not meet our requirements," she replied. "We've been advised to restructure without your participation." Theodore's voice remained controlled. "You're removing me from the deal." "Yes." The word was delivered without emphasis, without apology. "When did this change?" he asked. Karen hesitated just slightly. "It didn't change," she said. It became clear. The line went quiet. Theodore ended the call without another word. He sat there for a moment, the phone still in his hand, the implications settling in, not as shock, but as a confirmation of something that had already begun. This was not negotiation. This was removal. Across the city, in a conference room that had grown familiar in its stillness, Meghan Diaz reviewed the same development in a different form. Daniel Reeves placed a document in front of her. "Halstead has restructured," he said. "Your position remains intact through the parent entity." Meghan looked at the page. The structure was clear, the layers aligned. "And Theodore?" she asked. Daniel did not need to check. "He's no longer included," he said. Meghan nodded. There was no visible reaction, no shift in expression, only acknowledgement. Back at the house, the second confirmation arrived before noon. A letter, formal, delivered electronically and in print. The bank had finalized its review. Theodore opened it at his desk, reading through the language that mirrored what he had already begun to understand. Account access has been permanently adjusted to reflect updated governance structures. Administrative authority has been reassigned. All future transactions will require approval through designated channels. He set the document down. The room felt smaller again, more contained, not physically, structurally. Eleanor entered without knocking. Her presence, once stabilizing, now carried a different weight. "Well," she asked. Theodore did not look up immediately. "They've finalized it," he said. Eleanor stepped closer. "What does that mean?" "It means I don't control the accounts anymore." The words settled into the room with a finality that did not require repetition. Clara, standing near the doorway, frowned. "That's temporary," she said quickly. "It has to be." Theodore shook his head. "It's not." Eleanor's posture stiffened. On whose authority? Theodore looked at her. Meghan's. The silence that followed was different from the ones before. It was not filled with assumption. It was filled with recognition. Clara's voice came next, quieter now. "That doesn't make sense," she said. Theodore did not respond, because the structure had already moved beyond what made sense to them. The third confirmation arrived that afternoon, not through a call, not through a letter, through absence. Theodore attempted to access a property file connected to another project. The system denied entry. He tried again. The same result. A message appeared. "Access restricted. Contact administrator." Theodore stared at the screen. The word administrator no longer referred to him. Across the city, Meghan closed the final file of the day. Daniel stood gathering the documents. "That's the last of the confirmations," he said. "Everything is now aligned." Meghan nodded. She stood moving toward the window. The city outside remained unchanged. Traffic moved. People walked. Nothing in the view reflected the adjustments that had taken place beneath it. "What happens next?" she asked. Daniel paused. "Now we finalize," he said. "Custody, property, separation." Meghan's gaze remained outward, and Theodore Daniel considered the question. "He continues," he said, "with the consequences of his actions." Meghan did not respond, because the process did not require her to define those consequences. It had already begun to deliver them. Back in the house, the shift became impossible to ignore. Not because of a single moment, but because there were no moments left that felt stable. Eleanor moved through the rooms with less certainty. Clara stopped offering quick explanations. Vanessa did not return. The house itself remained intact. But the structure within it had changed. Theodore stood in the center of it, the same place he had occupied days earlier, but without the same foundation beneath him. He looked around. The furniture, the walls, The spaces that had once reflected his control now felt like something else. Not taken, not removed, reassigned. He reached for his phone, opened Meghan's contact, paused, then closed it again, because the conversation he had attempted to start no longer held the same weight. Across the city, Meghan returned to the crib. The newborn slept, unaffected. She adjusted the blanket once more. Her movements remained consistent, measured, unchanged. Then she stepped back. The room remained quiet, not empty, not waiting, complete. And in that completeness, nothing needed to be reclaimed. Nothing needed to be proven. Because everything that mattered had already moved into place, without noise, without spectacle, without the need for her to say a single word. The final steps did not feel like an ending. They felt like alignment. There were no raised voices in the room where it concluded. No visible conflict. No moment designed for impact. The process moved the way it had from the beginning, through documents, through confirmations, through structures that did not require interpretation. Meghan Diaz sat at the long table, the same one she had returned to over the past weeks. The surface was clear except for the final set of papers arranged in front of her. Across from her, Daniel Reeves reviewed the last page, his posture unchanged, his movements precise. To confirm, he said, this document finalizes the separation terms, custody arrangements, and property status. Everything reflects what has already been established. Meghan nodded. She had read it, not once, several times. Each clause aligned with what had been built through the previous steps. There were no surprises, no late adjustments, nothing inserted at the last moment to alter direction. Custody remains with you, Daniel continued. Visitation is structured and conditional. Financial obligations are defined. Property rights are resolved through the existing ownership framework. Meghan's gaze moved briefly to the final page. The signature line waited. She did not reach for the pen immediately. Not out of hesitation, out of acknowledgement. This was the point where everything that had been set into motion became fixed. Across the table, another chair remained occupied. Theodore Bennett. He had arrived on time. He had not spoken when he entered. He had reviewed the documents with Mark Ellison, his movements, controlled his expression, measured in a way that suggested effort rather than ease. He did not interrupt as Daniel spoke. He did not challenge the language. Because by now the structure of what was in front of him no longer allowed for challenge in the way he had once understood it. He looked different. Not in appearance, but in position. The certainty that had defined him had been replaced with something quieter. Not acceptance, recognition. When Meghan finally reached for the pen, the movement was simple, deliberate. She signed her name. The ink settled into the page without hesitation. Daniel nodded once, sliding the document forward. Theodore, he said. Theodore picked up the pen. For a moment, he held it above the paper, his gaze fixed on the line where Meghan's name had already been written. There was no visible emotion, no outward reaction, but the pause carried weight. Then he signed. The motion was controlled, final. Daniel gathered the documents, aligning them into a single file. That concludes the process, he said. No one responded immediately, because there was nothing left to clarify. No additional terms, no further negotiation. The structure had closed. Meghan stood. She did not look at Theodore right away. Instead, she moved to collect the small folder that contained her copies of the documents. Her movements remained consistent with everything that had come before, measured precise without unnecessary motion. When she turned, her gaze met Theodore's for the first time since the meeting began. He did not speak immediately, neither did she. The space between them was no longer defined by disagreement. It was defined by completion. I didn't understand, Theodore said finally. The words were quiet, not defensive, not accusatory. A statement. Meghan listened. She did not interrupt. "I thought," he began, then stopped, because whatever he had thought no longer aligned with what existed. Meghan's expression did not change. She did not respond to the explanation. She did not correct it, because the process had already done that. After a moment, Theodore nodded slightly, as though acknowledging something that did not require words. That's all he said. It was not a question. Meghan inclined her head once. Yes. There was no hostility in the exchange. No attempt to revisit what had already been recorded, reviewed, and resolved. She turned, then moving toward the door. Daniel followed at a respectful distance. The room remained still behind her. Theodore did not move to stop her. He did not call her back. He remained where he was, the documents in front of him, now part of a structure he no longer controlled. Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter, clearer. Meghan stepped into it without hesitation. The car was waiting, as it had been before. The driver opened the door. She paused briefly, her gaze moving across the street. The buildings, the people passing by without awareness of what had just concluded inside. Nothing in the world outside marked the moment. No signal, no recognition. The process had ended quietly, as it had begun. Meghan entered the car. The door closed. Inside, the space remained calm, contained unchanged by the finality of what had just occurred. She did not look back. Not because there was nothing behind her, but because nothing behind her required her attention anymore. The car moved forward, merging into the flow of the city without disruption. In the days that followed, Meghan did not make sudden changes. She did not shift her life in visible, dramatic ways. She moved into a residence that had already been prepared, one that reflected the same principles. She had carried through everything else: structure, privacy, clarity. The newborn adapted quickly. The routines established themselves. Feeding, rest, observation. Meghan returned to the documents when necessary, not out of urgency, but out of responsibility. The structures her father had built required attention, not display. She attended meetings, reviewed reports, made decisions that aligned with long-term stability rather than immediate reaction. Her name began to appear in places where it had not before. Not publicly, not in ways that invited attention, but within systems that recognized authority. Across the city, Theodore remained in the house that no longer functioned the way it once had. Eleanor visited less frequently. Clara's calls became shorter. Vanessa did not return. The spaces remained the same, but the structure within them had changed. He adjusted, because there was no alternative. The routines continued. Work, meetings, new arrangements that reflected a different position. Not absent, not removed, but altered. And in that alteration, there was a clarity that had not existed before. The night he had stood in the doorway, certain of his position, now existed as a record. Not a memory that could be reshaped. Not a moment that could be reinterpreted. A record. Meghan did not revisit it. She did not need to. Her focus remained forward, on the child in her care, on the structures she now oversaw, on the life that had moved into alignment without requiring her to raise her voice to argue or to demand. She did not reclaim anything. She did not take anything back. She stepped into what had already been placed in her name, and she carried it with the same quiet strength she had always held. Some stories do not end with confrontation. They end with clarity. There are moments in life when silence is mistaken for absence, when restraint is read as weakness, when control appears to belong to the one who speaks the loudest. But structure does not respond to volume. It responds to truth, to consistency, to what can be proven and preserved. Meghan Diaz never argued for her position. She never needed to. She observed, documented, and allowed the process to move exactly as it was designed to. And in that process, everything that mattered aligned not suddenly, not dramatically, but inevitably. Theodore Bennett believed control was something he could define on his own. What he discovered slowly and without spectacle was that control is only real when it rests on something that cannot be removed. This story is not about revenge. It is about consequence. It is about what happens when actions are recorded, when silence holds its ground, and when truth is given the time and structure it needs to be seen. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to reflect on where you are watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. These quiet moments of connection matter more than they seem. And if you value stories that explore truth, resilience, and the strength that doesn't need to announce itself, you're welcome to stay, to follow, and to return. There are more stories like this waiting to be told.